This job requires someone who has an education background, but also understands the political process and knows how to get things done. And I'm proud that in the last 4 years, I've helped to provide another $1 billion for early education, that I've been able to move money from the criminal justice system and into K-12 education to do things like restoring good attendance for our students, which helps our kids be ready to learn to read by 3rd grade and actually puts dollars into our school districts. And so I think for someone like myself who has served as a school board member, who's been a classroom teacher, who's run after school programs, but has also used the political process to improve education, I happen to think that that is the perfect blend of experiences.
And I was lucky enough in my 20s, I was working in finance, and I just wasn't happy. The work I was doing every day as I was just growing up and maturing as a person, like you do, at least for me in the 20s, some people maybe earlier, some later, just realized that I had to work on stuff I was passionate about, and my work was so disconnected from my values that I said I got to get a different track. I went and did a year of service work abroad where I taught in Zimbabwe and in Thailand, and really in Zimbabwe in particular. I just fell in love with the kids I was with and just realized how many challenges there were in this world, and this idea of waiting until I was 60 or 70 to live out what I believe in, which is like we got to be here for each other. I said I'm not doing that, and so then I eventually went to education because I'm a pretty kind of practical problem solver, and so I said I want to work domestically versus internationally, and I believe in this state and this country, the most important issue that can actually help change the most lives, it's the most solvable, is public schools, and that's what eventually led me into education full-time in 2002. I believe this state has not prioritized public education in a truly meaningful, deep way, at least during times I've been paying attention most of my lifetime. I'm 45. There's no other way to kind of rationalize how the wealthiest state in the nation can have some of the lowest performing public schools.
Our education system has been chronically underfunded for decades. California's 46th in the nation in per pupil spending, even though we're the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. I'd like to see us within 4 years move our per pupil spending to being within the top 10 states, and within 8 years be certainly number 1. I think that California students deserve to be number 1, and I think that is something that I know that will be my top priority if I'm elected as State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Well, I think that we should do, rather than create a 2-tier compensation structure, is just pay everybody more. Pay teachers more, pay principals more. I've looked at the research that looks at the idea of paying teachers more to try and recruit them into harder to serve areas. And the research is very, very mixed.
You can do differentiated compensation. You certainly have to bargain it, but if you make the dollars from local control funding actually follow the kids, right, then I think what you'll see is you'll see more districts use some of that money for teachers and principals, right? Like to pay that are actually teaching in our neediest schools. Certainly in LA where I work, we know that the current system leads to more what are called must-place teachers. LA Unified has a much higher percentage of what are called must-place teachers in our lowest income schools and our lowest performing schools. Those are teachers that are forced there because they aren't able to get their own jobs. This law disproportionately impacts our kids of color and low-income kids. Let's move to community. Let's try community college system in our public schools for a while and see if it improves things. And let's have a strong data system to see it.
I think teacher tenure should be at least 3 years. I've said that. I think what we should be doing, though, as it relates to teacher tenure, is changing the conversation. So far, the conversation has been, when is it okay to fire a teacher? And I think if we're starting at the firing at 2 years or 3 years, we waited too late. We should be talking about front-loading training and professional development for new teachers when they start. You give them training, you give them a mentor, and you give them feedback early on. And if a teacher's not doing well, you give them feedback early on so they have a chance to make a correction. If they can't ever make that correction, at some point, you have to have a hard conversation that this just may not be the right profession for that person. I think that it should be fully transparent how those dollars are spent. There's no question of that. The whole purpose of the local control funding formula is to give local people an ability to help direct where those dollars go. No, I think some districts have been very creative in the types of programs that they have created to help disadvantaged students and students in foster care and English learners. I think other districts have probably used these dollars to fill holes that have existed.
Some of that money is not being spent on the kids that it's intended for, so I think our implementation on equity has been very short.
What can we do to fix that?
Well, we're going to, on day one, I mean, the current state superintendent made an interpretation of the policy. School districts asked, can you use this money for across-the-board raises and other district-wide expenses? And they said yes. And so I'm going to change that interpretation on day one.
What I've talked about is us taking a pause on the growth of charters so that we can examine what can we possibly support and fund. Charter school law hasn't been reviewed for decades. I've not said moratorium because I think that there are places where it makes sense to be able to still expand a charter school. I visited a charter school on a Native American reservation that is providing tremendous support for Native American students who were not well served in the traditional public school system.
I was glad that the legislature, it's been long overdue, but finally passed the ban on for-profit charters like that. I mean, it was a tiny percentage of charters, 3%, but nonetheless, it just doesn't make sense. I was glad that actually happened. I think they've made progress on, although I think it should just be done, is more transparency on charter school boards and leadership. So like in our schools at Green Dot, we always follow the Brown Act, and that just should be there, and kind of clarity on transparency and open meetings and no conflict of interest like that. These are public schools, absolutely should be the case. Third is we should be more aggressive about intervening with ineffective charters. So the rate that charter schools have been shut down is much lower than it should be.
I'm honored to be supported by teachers. I'm in a race where I'm supported by teachers and my opponent is supported by billionaires. And so, who do you want to be supported by? But even in spite of being supported by teachers union, that doesn't mean that I'm just going to support whatever anybody asks for. And I would ask your viewers to look at my voting record, and that there have been significant votes that I've taken that have been opposite of what the teachers union has asked for.
Like what?
Most recently, we just voted to make the school start date later for middle school and high school kids. The teachers union opposed that bill. I supported it. I might have been the deciding vote for it passing. It passed with 41 votes. And I supported it because the research shows there's brain psychology that says for older kids, getting up a little later and getting more sleep helps them to be more successful, helps them to be involved in fewer car accidents, in transport to school. Why wouldn't I do the thing that is best for kids?
If you look at my agenda, the vast majority of my agenda is focused on how do you support teachers and principals. That's the most important thing in schools. I want to actually pay teachers more over time. Can't do it right away, but I do think right away we can do free college if you commit to teach for 5 years or more. Like that's a meaningful strategy. I do want to quickly move on improving our teacher training programs because they're just behind in the past. So we have our teachers more prepared to be successful, help improve retention at schools by providing more supports to teachers. Those things are strongly aligned with CTA. I believe in giving a lot of innovative flexibility to teachers in the classroom. We do have disagreements on nonprofit charter schools. We have disagreements on, I think that the laws around seniority-based layoffs and tenure need to be adjusted. I believe we have to differentiate pay for low-income schools. The way I think about how to deal with it is I'm going to call them the day after I win this election and let them know what I've told them today. I'm working, we have to work together. You have to work with labor at scale to improve our schools. We're going to try to work on pieces of work where we have strong alignment. The teacher shortage is one area where there's strong alignment on solving that problem, getting more supports for teachers, more effective principals. The first thing we did in all of our schools is make sure a strong principal, because they're the most important person to actually support teachers at a school site. There's strong alignment there. And then, but also be willing to, when need be, working with the Equity Coalition and others, respectfully disagree on issues. We're gonna, seniority-based layoffs, it hurts low-income kids. There's just no getting around it. And so that's something where if they don't adjust their opinions, then we are at odds.